Great to have you on the show, Brett. Would love to know more about you.
Yeah, Guru, thanks very much for having me. I'm glad. I also apologize. Our name is a bit tricky to say, but you're getting it. Mzansi Meat Co. And yeah, we are Africa's first cultivated meat company, and we hope to be making the first beef burger in Africa.
Love it.
Yeah, and just happy to be here.
What is your story? How did you end up here as the CEO of the company?
My background has always been food. I worked for the past 10 years in marketing and food marketing in the alternative protein industry, predominantly plant-based. So that's been my focus for the last 10 years. And I've also been involved in animal advocacy in South Africa and as well as Germany and a few other countries, looking at large national meat reduction campaigns such as Meat Free Mondays and Veganuary, and just looking at the way of talking about food systems to South Africans and to an international audience in a way that sort of inspires subtle changes that has larger effects. So I've always been interested in looking at the psychology as well as why we eat what we do eat, and sort of having interesting discussions about it. And about after these 10 years of being involved in this space, in the alternative protein space, I saw that the promise of cultivated meat and cellular agriculture broadly, it's got the opportunity to provide a solution that's to everybody. I think a lot of people might say that things such as plant-based meats are a select few of people that are going to buy them, and it's not available and not accessible, or just not interesting to larger groups of the population. And we've seen that in South Africa, and the research seems to suggest the same thing. That quite a few South Africans are still very hesitant to get any kind of reduction to meat. So anyway, so after about this journey, came back to South Africa after living in Germany, and decided to start a company, a cultivated meat company, and that was it. Myself and Jay van der Walt and Tasneem Karodia, who are my co-founders, kicked the company going in March 2020. So we started in the beginning of lockdown. So it was an exceptionally unique challenge. And in doing that challenge in South Africa, which has got a very, we were the first. So it's a very small biotech, food tech industry, non-existent almost. And then raising and bringing capital into the country was also quite a challenge.
100%. So you already touched on a few of challenges you faced. Do you want to talk about the process? Like what were the key challenges? Finding a co-founder? How did you meet your co-founder? Raising funds? Getting access to the lab? Because starting a bio company is slightly more challenging than starting a tech company. So do you want to talk about the processes and the challenges you faced?
Sure thing. It's obviously a tech company. You can start with a laptop and then scale up. When it comes to biotech, you actually need brick and mortar a lot quicker. The journey of me and co-founder, I think, is extremely important. Luckily that I've been involved in alternative proteins for the past 10 plus years. I've met a lot of people along the way. A lot of those people have, good friends, have good networks, and have been able to connect me with a lot of people that are now involved in Mzansi. So I met Jay through the South African animal advocacy, I guess you can say, scene a number of years ago, and then towards the end of 2019, we just started talking. We said, well, look, we know each other now. We have a similar interest in animal advocacy, and we believe in the power of biotech and cellular agriculture to be a solution. And that was the sort of driving factor behind us starting that company. Taz, or Tasneem, who came on a little bit later, a couple of months after we founded, actually stumbled across our company on a Good Food Institute presentation, webinar, and the state of the industry. So she kind of saw this South African company, the first one. She said she needed to get involved, and the rest is sort of history. When it comes to the challenges, I think there's numerous, and I think that's a part of the fun of doing what we do. But it is difficult. It's not an easy journey. When particularly in the South African context, it was a case of us having to explain to investors what cellular agriculture is, whereas maybe in the European context, the American one, it's a bit more familiar. When it came to then speaking to American and European investors, it was about selling South Africa. So we had this double-edged sword that we had to sort of navigate when it came to investing. And nobody wants to be first. So nobody really wanted to jump into biotech in South Africa straight off the bat. And that was the biggest challenge. And we were doing it during lockdown. So not easy to have face-to-face meetings, obviously. and people weren't keen to be moving some capital probably into something as high risk as what we were doing. Then we were able to have an audience with Ryan Bethencourt, who's a prolific investor within the biotech space. And I think he just believed that Africa is going to be the next place to invest and for business to grow. When you have 1 billion people coming into the continents in the next 20, 30 years, it's a massive market, and it's been completely overlooked by your traditional investors. So he invested with us, he gave us a check, and that kind of really started the ball rolling. But we were still having big issues in terms of finding talents.
Right.
It's a nascent industry internationally. South Africa, there wasn't anyone who was actually working in it. So when it came, and all three of us, the founders of this company, are non-technical, which provided challenges, but provided also a unique insight into saying we need to make this a commercial venture straight. It's not a food experiment or a science experiment. And Jay's got a lot of background in cellular agriculture, self-taught. He was able to sort of pinpoint who we could sort of take from other places, such as maybe marine biology types, or those who've got expertise in bioprocessing and mycelium, and those who've got expertise in sports injuries. So we were, someone that could do cell tissue culture. So that's what we did. And we had to repurpose people that weren't necessarily involved in cellular agriculture, but who probably were aware of it, but hadn't ever done it sort of as a commercial venture. And then we were able to bring them and upskill them in the way of the actual markets and the commercial plans. And that was quite a difficult task, but we've now managed to grow our team to about 10 people and been able to get to that lab access, which, as you mentioned in the beginning, is something that is difficult to find. We managed to get in partnership with a organization called BioCity here in Cape Town. And BioCity have got a fully kitted lab, all the bells and whistles that we needed. And they gave us the keys, and we were able to repurpose it to exactly fit our needs. So that's kind of where the story is now.
Love it. BioCity has all the equipments, tools that you needed for cellular agriculture. Nice.
Yeah. So
what about fermenter? Like, do they have fermenters for bioprocessing work too?
So we've only been able to get stuff at bench scale. We're at bench scale. We're in the process now of doing the fermenters bioreactors. We've just done a new hire in the last month with Wade Edwards, who's got 15 years, 20 years experience in building bioreactors for the medical research sector. And he's going to be taking that and repurposing it and doing it here because, to be honest, it's just too expensive, actually. I actually saw a quote just literally before this podcast, which for hundreds and thousands of rands, which is $1 is 15 rand, which we can't, as a startup, afford. So we have to build it ourselves and do it bespoke. And luckily, Wade has got that experience, and he's going to be doing that. And he's already started. So I think that's an area where BioCity is giving us, we're partnering with them to get the space and to be able to upscale or scale up quickly. And then we're coming in and building the bespoke equipment that's going to allow us to go from where we are now, bench, into a sort of pilot production, and then into a facility that can actually go into commercial.
It's pretty cool. And what is your relationship with BioCity? Is it a non-profit?
I think it's quite a unique beast, let's say. We haven't seen it elsewhere, and it's not elsewhere in South Africa. They are a non-profit that is run by another organization so they're an incubator, but they're a non-profit incubator called BioCity, and they are run by an organization called the Cape Information Technology Initiative. And that's the province that we're in. It's the Cape Western Cape province. And it's a private and public initiative. So there's funding from government, there's funding from private sector, and there's funding from the likes of Merck and Thermo Fisher are partners as well. They haven't given funding, but they are partners. And they were able to create this environment which allowed for numerous startups to go and join. So there's a precision fermentation startup sitting next to us called Denova Dairy, who we're friends with. So when we're not doing science together with them, we're having beers and talking shop. And then there's a few others that also work in the same space. And it's a nice knowledge sharing environment that they've created with companies that are all in different industries, but are able to learn together and share knowledge and contacts. And it's led to investment leads on both for us and everything. So that's been great. But also that facility, it's incredibly cost effective for us. And I think I'd encourage anybody to look at these things because they are available in many countries. Might be different. So ours is a bit different here in South Africa, but the availability that you don't have to do that type of capex in the beginning,
right.
And having it available, and we are actually partly funded by the South African government through the Small Enterprise Development Agency and CIFA, meaning that we use a facility at a discounted rate that makes us very, very competitive when it comes to a startup, that's a year old, maybe at a different country, who doesn't have access to that.
It's pretty impressive because the biggest barrier to entry is accessing the lab space for early stage companies. So if you get access to the lab space, you still have many battles to fight, but still it gives you higher chances to get off the ground. That's pretty impressive.
I encourage people, even if you're a non-technical founder, and this is what we did, is we just occupied the space. Right. And started working from it, and then started getting scientists in, and then you started troubleshooting off the ground. And we've actually we've worked with BioCity, so the partnership does depend, but we've worked with BioCity to go and repurpose and redesign the entire lab, which had then moved so that it was far more ready to handle a cellular agriculture company than it was in the beginning. And that only comes with you. Someone might be like, my scientist is only starting a few months down the line, they've got to finish up their PhD. Then I'd say to you, stick yourself in the lab, even if you don't know what you're doing, but you can be having conversations with the lab manager and equivalents, and then start asking the right questions earlier on than putting a scientist in that position who wants to get there and start doing work instead of dealing with admin.
What type of customization you had to do to suit your purpose?
Initially, we were the first ones there. So it was a completely open lab space. And this was also, remember, the peak of lockdown. So there wasn't much activity happening. South Africa is not using its restrictions. It's like with the rest of the world, more people started entering the lab, more contamination started happening. So we now we also worked with one of our advisors from the University of Cape Town, the molecular biology department. She gave us Prof. Sue Kitson, gave us a lot of feedback in what we needed to do, from whether it's updating the wash basins to reduce chances of contamination, and making sure you've got showers and all these things, a significant amount with a growing number of people entering it. And the key thing was putting our space, our incubator, tissue culture hood, in a space that it made contamination completely zero and negligible. And I think that process, where we're at now, has really been beneficial, and it's also given, I think, a lot of confidence in BioCity and belief that we are the thought leaders in the space, and that trusting us to help them make their facility more attractive to future entrepreneurs. We obviously want our own facility one day, hopefully pretty soon, and we want to leave a space that others can occupy and don't have to have the headaches that we had. And hit the ground running.
Yeah, I think there are advantages as a first mover, but there are also disadvantages, because when you're creating an ecosystem, you have to really create the new processes, right, for others. So, but yeah, there's always some disadvantages that comes with every first mover advantage.
Yeah, I think that was also a challenge for us in the beginning, as I mentioned, particularly on the investment side, finding these things and convincing scientists to leave. Not tenured profs, but close to it, to come join a startup. And then I think, I think there's a bit of a responsibility that plays with being a first mover. And I think the benefit is that you get to shape the narrative.
Right.
South Africans don't know cultivated meat. And it's a term that's growing and being recognized. But in the beginning, a couple of years ago, it wasn't. And we now have the ability to say, like, how do we want this average South African to hear about cultivated meat for the first time, and what kind of discussion should be happening with regulations?
100%. I would love to learn more about, how do you position your company? We heard about Impossible Meat, Beyond Meat. So how do you basically position your company differently?
It's interesting that you led the question with those two, and I think there's something that we have to do to ensure or convince people or make them understand that we aren't plant-based meat. We're not a plant-based company. Yesterday, I actually had an interview with a journalist, and the title of the journal or the article is going to be something along the lines is cultivated meat vegan? And I actually want to, I will have those discussions, but I want to avoid being put in those in that category. I don't want to be put in the vegan category. I don't want to be put in flexitarian. I don't want to be put in plant-based or beyond meat. I want to be seen as a meat company, and then seen as a meat company that is cultivated. Similar in that there are companies that provide free-range meat, but they're a meat company, but it's free-range, for example.
Right.
I think the positioning of saying that this is a meat, that this is meat, and it happens to be a bit more innovative, in our opinion. I think that's the way that we want to approach. In terms of it being, there's a position that meat occupies in South Africa that is so strong with the culture that an example I give to a lot of foreign folks is that our National Heritage Day, which maybe is equivalent to 4th of July, I'd say, has been renamed Braai Day. And braai is barbecue, so it's your barbecue day. So it's a spontaneous thing. It's actually not official at all, but that's how core putting meat on a fire is to South Africans. And we want to be playing in that space. We want to be positioned next in that space, not next to, in that space. And looking at culture first, and looking at how important meat is to South Africans from a cultural perspective. Traditional African ceremonies require a slaughter of a cow. There's so many other layers that we want to be working within to ensure that Mzansi is positioned as a meat company that is helping solve a problem, which could be something like, which is more pressing in South Africa, something like food security.
Yeah, so you already touched upon it, but to double click on it. So you talked about your focus is not necessarily the cruelty-free or ethics side or veganism. There's a whole movement around it. Then the question one would ask, then why cellular meat? Why don't we just do what we are already doing? We already spent hundreds of years learning this art to produce meat in the traditional way. So why do we need cellular agriculture?
I think it's a good question, and I think it's the fine line that I want us to play. I think if you lead with a moral argument all the time on something, particularly as something as sensitive as food, you result in pushback. And this is based on 10 years. This is 10 years of working in animal advocacy and asking South Africans to eat vegan food. And that's, I mean, it's not been unsuccessful, but it's been a tough journey.
Right.
And unfortunately, the current offering of plant-based going onto something like an open fire, it's not doing the pop and sizzle that you get from lamb chops or something. In terms of the why, I think the positioning is one to say that this is sort of a next step in that 110,000 years of improving the way that we do agriculture, you know, and the way that livestock was sort of a next step from hunter-gathering. And I would say that this is where we need to be focusing on, is that cellular agriculture is the next step. And that it then provides the answer to what many people see as big pressing issues: climate change, animal welfare, cruelty, ecosystem destruction in the natural habitats, etc. I don't think it's necessarily something that you say is mutually exclusive. I mean, you can talk to them together, but I think a framing and then providing something that is seen as not taking away experience. You know, at the moment, plant-based is I eat plant-based all the time. I am plant-based, but providing something like a veggie burger and saying it's equivalent to a fillet steak is just not going to be happening anytime soon. And then providing something that is cultivated, which still isn't going to be on the tables of everybody in the next, immediate future, but it provides a sort of pathway that I think is going to be a lot more palatable to people, and saying that I see that in the future, this could be something that is ubiquitous as meat, and that eventually when the price point is lower, there'll be a natural shift over to it. And unfortunately, I think there's been too many people that's had that bad tofu experience. Yes. And they're not going to shift. I'm happy to be wrong, Impossible Foods makes incredible food, and I happily be wrong because I'm driven by animal reasons, but that's just my personal belief.
And do you think once we optimized all the processes to produce lab-grown meat, this is more economical and a scalable way to produce meat?
I think under the current landscape, if you look at it, if you had to look at it right now, the answer has to be no. It's too expensive right now. The example I gave about bioreactors, which are crucial for this process, are too expensive and they're not ready to be food grade, and no one seems to be able to do that at scale now. I think however, if you look what has happened in the last 10 years, when 10 years ago there were 4 companies making cultivated meat from scratch, the whole process, and it costing $250,000 for one burger,
right,
like Mzansi Meat. I think, and then you look at the progress it's made in the last 10 years, and then you start looking at Moore's law, or however you want to account for that improved technology in the next 10 years. I think it is possible to say from a future perspective, from looking to the future, the prices will become competitive rather, and it will become more widespread. I think that this is where, I mean, my background, actually, I studied economics 15 years ago. And I think this is where the economist sometimes gets it right a bit more than maybe the scientist or the journalist from who's got a social science background. Because it's not, you can't look at the future based exactly on the current situation. And there's probably a whole bunch of unknown knowns or known unknowns or whatever that are going to unfold in the next 5 or 10 years that are going to completely shift things away. And it's not even about the maybe cultivated meats. And the example is always given of mobile phones. If you look at mobile phones 25 years ago and you showed it to somebody, it's a clunky, very heavy, I mean, it's a ridiculous piece of tech that people started using, even though it was subpar compared to the incumbents, which was landline. Right. And then the expansion of technology and this growth. But if you went again 25 years ago and said, do you know that this technology is going to fundamentally change mobile? Mobile didn't even exist, but commerce in East Africa, impossible. Could you say that this technology in the early 90s is going to fundamentally change the way that humans date through things like Tinder and everything? You would think you're crazy. So to look at it from the cultivated meat perspective, I think there's a lot of work being done. There's specialization happening. There's 100 companies working in the space now, up and downstream, focusing on key areas, which are the media, the bioreactors, those 2 or 3 key trip-ups that are happening in the industry that are holding it sort of back from scaling right now. And I think we'll see something happen in that space. We hope to be driving it from somewhere in the bioreactor space. That's where we want to be playing as our contribution to the industry. And then once you see that happening, and I think the spontaneous reaction to that, you might see a completely different looking landscape in food and protein in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. The future can be more interesting than what we are envisioning right now. I was talking to someone, they are producing therapeutic blood, right? Artificially synthesizing blood. So when I was talking to him, he was like, even when you produce lab-grown meat, you can produce therapeutic meat by adding more nutritional value, or by adding more protein of interest that can help you fix diseases. So it can go in many different interesting directions. So it's not just about fulfilling the taste buds. It can be more about the essential things that we can fix potentially by producing lab-grown meat.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because it gives you more control, right? So when you create a cell line, it's completely in your hands to produce the cell lines and what genes you want to express. It's not scalable, but in theory, it's possible.
Exactly, and I think that's the really exciting thing about this industry is that what we are trying to produce is a future promise of solving food security and making enough protein for everyone in 20, 30, hundreds of years' time, take it to Mars type of thing. But at the same time, we're going to be stumbling on a lot of eureka moments along the way, right, where who knows what kind of medical breakthroughs will be made because of it. And we actually about maybe 6 months to a year ago, we're in discussions with somebody in medical research, and they were doing something very specific that was, affected 10, 20, 30 people in South Africa. So at that current stage, I mean, in terms of the trials, and it would be very difficult for them to go and do that at scale, because there's never enough people to go and
Right.
on. Whereas we would obviously have much bigger facilities that they would be able to plug in, because we want to be meeting the demand of 60 million people in South Africa, and then ultimately the rest of the continent. So I think the medical research might also benefit from having this food tech, biotech explode and grow, and then help speed things along, because as we know, it just takes a lot longer on the medical pharmaceutical side, and food isn't as quick, and maybe there can be some crossover.
100%. 100%. I think this is a great segue to talk about your tech. Like, what is the science behind what you're doing? Something high level, so our viewers can understand. When you're producing a meat at the bench, what exactly you're doing? You're producing a cell line, then doing bioprocessing. So how does the process look like?
I'll give you a quick and high level overview of what we're doing. And it starts with the biopsy.
Mm-hmm.
That's the and getting a tissue sample that we can draw cells from. I mean, in the beginning, it's something like 5,000-10,000 cells that we're looking at. And 5,000 or 10,000 sounds like a lot, but obviously in cells, it's nothing. And we need to get it up into the trillions. That's where you start working towards producing something that is a burger. So that's a big exponential jump that needs to happen. You mentioned the cell lines, and I think that was something that was incredibly. That is a very difficult process to get right. It took us a while to do so. Difficulty there as well is that there's a lot of IP associated with this. So a lot of companies are closed booked, and there isn't like everybody's trying to reinvent the wheel a bit. So if your listeners are looking to start, that is your initial hurdle that you have to get. So after we were able to, isolate and get those cells to be stable, and then get them into a condition that they start proliferating, in the beginning, at a bench scale, what we're doing at the moment, it is only for proof of concept. It's not something that we're not making for production into food service or retail, and that's the goal that we want to get in our current fundraise, to get funding to push us into that. But it's just a case of taking those selection of cells, 5,000 to 10,000, putting it into a media, and putting that media, which is the nutrients which your body likes. I mean, it's just what your body or a cow's body wants, and those cells need it to start proliferating and doubling every 24 to 39 hours. You get it. You need that to happen a lot. You need those passages, the doubling, to happen a lot of time. It's probably more than I think a lot of people realized in the beginning, of how many times those passages need to happen. And then it's just about keeping those conditions right, sort of Goldilocks conditions, to get that biomass up into a place where you've got enough of three ingredients, or there's two ingredients. It's just fat. It's co-culturing fats and meat, or muscle cells. And those muscle cells and those fat need to actually attach to something. So we have to put a scaffold into it. So at the moment, we're doing it in an incubator, which is in a 2D space, and that's got its limits, because you and I are not 2D beings, even though we're talking on a Zoom call. We're 3D, and we need that to be happening in suspension, and that's that fermenter that you spoke about, or the bioreactors. So we're in the process of, we've got a DIY bioreactor at the moment, but it's still not big enough, and that's where you can start achieving some scale and letting those cells proliferate in a 1 liter, 2 liter, 5. And that's the beauty of this thing, is that it goes from your tea flasks and your 175s and whatever quite quickly into your 2 liter, your 5 liter. And when it's continuous flow, then it means you've got cells growing all the time. And from that space, you are able to then process it into a patty, into burger patty, and then we'll need to add flavors and spices and everything else that you would find in a burger. So ultimately, that burger is what is going to be our first product, which we're hoping to work and achieve in the next 3 to 6 months to get it into market. And when I say market, I mean into so that customers and consumers know that it exists. And then we buy in the next year, in depending on the level of upscale in our biopressing production at BioCity, we want to be getting into a burger joint in South Africa, and we've luckily already shook hands with one of those outlets, which have got a national footprint, and they're interested in being the first, and we're pretty happy to be the first to be bringing that cultivated burger into a national restaurant, and it needs to be national because even though it might be one restaurant, it needs to be seen as this is something that's going to be coming for the whole of South Africa and not just some kind of exclusive product.
Sure. Do you want to comment on where is the secret sauce? Like, what is your key IP here? Is it the extraction process, or the way you produce cell lines, or the way you immortalize them, or the way you bioprocess them? Like, what is the key secret sauce here?
I think there's a couple of things to IP. I think and the way that we're looking at it, and the way that I'm looking at it particularly, is that where do we as a company want to be seen as a leader? And we want to be seen as a leader in the bioprocessing component, in manufacturing. And part of that is due to the fact that its cost of doing business in South Africa is cheaper, and manufacturing is cheaper, and so is labor. And part of it is because of the unique talent that we've got within our team, led by Dr. Wade Edwards. So within that production of those bioreactors, there will be IP that we are strongly, and I think that we will be looking at unique ways of how we're going to get something that costs in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we want to get it down by a tenth. And that's an ambitious goal that we've set out. I think in the immortalization component, which you touched on, and the cell lines, I think that that's something which we've successfully started the process, and we also think that we've got a unique and novel way that might be not being done by others in terms of making those cells develop many times, and a different source than definitely what the research and literature was saying a couple of years ago. And I think there's probably quite a few people that have moved in that direction on the cell lines and immortalization. I think that's a unique opportunity that we have identified and that we want to try and exploit to kind of showcase our technical know-how. And I think the isolation, of extraction, the protocols associated with that, I think those might eventually become not just us, but I think everybody will know them. But I think there's a couple of unique places, and the third and final one that I'm looking at, and what we're looking at, is the media. You can't sell this product if your cost of media is $80 per liter. South Africa, and the use of certain things such as FPS, which is also just exceptionally expensive. And just obviously not something that you want to use in your product. We have at bench scale been able to look at ways of getting that price down from about $80 to $5. And obviously we want to keep that price going down even further. And there's places that we've sort of identified where maybe it might be just internal knowledge that we don't let out. Maybe it might not be a patent or an IP, and that's sort of obvious way, but I think that's definitely a place that we've already seen an ability to drive costs down quite considerably, and benefit the fact that we are in South Africa, where there are some cheaper prices. Great.
Are you exploring some alternatives of bovine serum? Because bovine serum is like traditionally used to culture cells.
Yeah. I think for FBS or fetal bovine serum or serum there's been a discussion since I remember people were talking about cultivated meat. So this is a true story. I was actually doing a presentation in 2014 about the future of meat as an animal advocate type person, talking about plant-based and this new thing called cultivated meat, which was now maybe only 1 year into its commercialization, and was called over that point on FPS and the fact that it's something that is still, it cannot be done without it at that stage. If you flash forward to now, we're aware of two companies that I actually don't know the names of one, but that haven't been able to produce without FPS, cultivated meat, in some shape or form. That's been quite a breakthrough. And then there's the people that are specializing it, and we're working with them, Future Fields, etc., and specializing in how to get rid of that serum. So I think that the benefit is that we don't have to worry about making it sure that we're the ones doing it from scratch. There are others focusing on this massive problem. I think it will be solved. I think it's already starting to happen, but it's been said for 10 years, so I can understand why there might be some hesitancy and whether or not this will be something that's always in the pipeline of cultivated meats. But the practical thing that I look at it, and I think this is what Good Meat or Eat Just did with their launch in Singapore when they were the first to bring it to retail. They had FPS, to my knowledge, in their product, and they were open about it. And I think if you were pragmatic in saying that the potential of cultivated meat, that unfortunately we have to use the existing structurally terrible industry that we are trying to improve upon. I think for the most part, those first early adopters who are looking at cultivated meat as something that they want to include in their diets might be open to it, And I think in the long run, it will be eliminated, but there might be a bit of attrition to get to that point. And I don't think that's a significant enough, how do we say this, significant enough, not silver bullet, but the opposite against cultivated meat to say they can't go ahead. I think the bigger issues, which have been highlighted by numerous people before, and I think are valid, is the cost of media and the cost of bioreactors or the scale-up equipment costs. Those are far more important. I think when you resolve those, the FPS with scale will come as well.
Pretty good. So we talked about your story, company, technology. Let's talk about the commercial side of things. So let's say biomanufacturing is done. It is approved by FDA to market it. So what is the next step? Like, what business model you are exploring currently?
So yeah, I think that's just as a quick note on the regulations. South Africa has something different to the FDA. It's a bit more fragmented, the approach. So and there's quite a few acts that define what meat is, which means it's a bit of it's actually quite helpful in that we can possibly move a bit faster to get to that place where, as long as we fit within an existing framework which defines food and meat, we should be fine. When it comes to the go-to-market that we have, it's quite nice because it was our go-to-market strategy a year ago. Now we have a go-to-market plan. So it's changed because now we have potential customers. So the next 12 months, it's about getting a successful prototype. Getting that in front of customers, getting the PR, getting enough people to be excited about it. Then it goes into, at the end of next year, our plan is to do a sampling events, and this is all ambitious targets and folks listening. And I mean, this stuff, you've got to try and make these commitments, and it is difficult. But by the end of next year, we want to be in at least one restaurant of a national chain that will allow us to get exposure to a lot more people than maybe the few people that might sample the products. It might not be sold in the beginning for the fact that it probably will be too expensive. We want to get sampling up. We want to get that first 1,000 South Africans, whatever that number is, to eat cultivated meat, and then they can do it probably on our buck. After that, we want to expand into more restaurants, into a few more places within the Western Cape, which is a province of South Africa, so it's not the rest of the country. We still wouldn't go national because we need to be able to control our supply and work on our processes. By that stage, depending on the fundraisers, we would have done a seed round that is going to help get us to a pilot production facility in 2023 or so. And then our ultimate goal is to get then a national type of distribution in food service, quick service restaurants. Again, this is all potentially a blended product might be the most feasible thing to do, but we'll have to see when we get there. But my ultimate goal and the teams is to get into retail, and we want to do that by 2023, 2024. What that looks like also depends. So it might look like deli. It might be in a deli opposed to your print packs in a chiller, for a few reasons, and speed being one of them. And then ultimately, we want to get into distribution. Not our company, we would work with others, but we want to be getting into a major retailer within the next 5 years.
That makes sense. Are you exploring revenue generation through licensing out by offering this to other startups or other companies trying to do the same thing in Africa?
Yeah, I think we've actually, we say we're making meat for Africa, and we mean it. So the licensing thing is something that we haven't really considered just yet. We have already, one of our angel investors is John Simpson from Bluegrass Partners in Singapore, and he's got a significant network through Africa, and he's very bullish on Africa, and he's very bullish on what we're doing. And they've set up agricultural companies that have done beef through Zambia and chicken in Kenya and the like, and those individuals are really interested in what we're doing. So we would definitely move into looking in the East Africa region in the beginning. It's about finding the right partners, which we think that we will find, and through the contacts that we have already. So definitely looking at that. Wouldn't be a priority just yet because we want to get it right in South Africa. What is probably more likely is that within the next several years is that we would have offshoots that might be through a B2B company that could sell top of the head cultivated fat, or our bioreactors, and we might be the one thing that we license. And manufacture here for internationals. So those are high level things that we're thinking about. Definitely not our focus. Our focus is getting a burger into the restaurant next year, and then a burger or a sausage or something into a retailer the following.
Cool. I would love to double click on regulatory approval. You said there's something, the regulatory and the process is different what FDA has. So every country in Africa has its own regulatory body, or it's like one regulatory body. Once you have the approval, you have access to all the countries altogether.
Yeah, that's actually a good, I only know I'm more versed on sort of the Southern African countries and East African. Interestingly enough, there is a bit of complexity that arises between countries that are Portuguese descent, French descent, English descent in terms of being a former colony. South Africa is former British colony, common law, a slightly more simpler one to go from like South Africa to, let's say, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi, because they all used to be part of then Rhodesia and South Rhodesia, I think. So that depends. I don't think it's necessarily like something like the African Union, which we do have, but they don't have the same sort of control over others in terms of their regulations, particularly when it comes to food. I think that's decided upon by individual countries. When it comes to South Africa, this is what I do know, is that we don't have when it comes to food, the same sort of regulatory body as the FDA or the USDA or the European Council, whatever it is over there. I think it's FCA, and then the equivalent in Singapore, and we don't have that. What we do have is we have 3 departments that govern different aspects of it. So we have the Department of Agriculture, or DALARD, forestry, and a few other things, and the Department of Health and the Department of Trade of Industry. And what's cool about that is that you almost can imagine it in terms of the journey of a cultivated startup like us. You need to be engaging with them at different times along the way. What we're doing in the beginning, because we're interacting with live animals, livestock, we have to get approval to go and do biopsies, to be working with animals. So there's a lot of legislation and stuff that we've had to wrestle in the beginning, which was a massive pain. I would say another swear word, but I know it's a family show. Was a massive massive pain in the beginning, which we've been able to get through, and that's the South Africa, for example, the South African Meat Safety Act is sort of in that realm, but that only speaks to livestock that have like meat from a slaughtered animal. It's not really relevant to us. Then when it comes to the Department of Health, they regulate a few other. There's the Food something and Cosmetics Act, Foodstuffs and Cosmetics Act. That's when we start being governed by. Okay, and then you've got something like there's the Agricultural Products Act, which is also under. So the point is that there's like 3 different departments that kind of oversee the way that South Africans food is regulated, and you need to find out where you fit. If you do not fit within those frameworks, those policy frameworks, and you try and want to change policy, you'll be waiting a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But as the encouraging thing that we've been looking at is that if you fit within this framework, an existing framework that might need a policy note or something that's not a wholesale change, like what might be required in Europe or something with the Novel Foods Act or whatever their thing is, it's a lot quicker. So along our journey, and the reason why in our business models that we're looking at food service is that because food service is required has a very different sort of back-end approach, and there's a big difference between selling, for example, cooked meat versus raw meat. And if you sell cooked meat, there's a different. So it's easier is what I'm trying to get to. But the difficulty will lie at that end retailer when you want to start doing labeling. When you start saying how do you put it, cultivated meat? Mm-hmm. Can you call it that? That's further down the line. Department of Trade and Industry, unfortunately, the name is not like what they should be doing. They're not helping. One could argue not really helping trade and industry, but the labeling component might be difficult, and that's further down the line for us. We want to break it up for that reason, and then sort of eat the whale one bite at a time. But obviously a cultivated meat whale.
Pretty good, very insightful. As we have 1 minute left, I would love to hear your final words about the future of cellular agriculture in South Africa and Africa, and the whole continent.
I think, firstly, I'm excited about it. Mm-hmm. I think, we were talking before, what's the driver behind starting a company or being a founder is like, I think once you start it, you can't stop. And I think the same thing is with cultivated meats. Once it's now started, as we started it a year ago, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to stop. I think Africa is a massive continent. This is a stupid statement, but it's true. There are hundreds of thousands of potential founders on this continent that are going to be able to make a massive change. They need to be connected with simple things, equipment and funds to get something started, and talent. It is possible, and I think cellular agriculture as a whole is going to expand. I think you're going to see a significant shift in interest but in above or in addition to the very keen interest that's happened in the other emerging markets, your Southeast and your South America. And I think Africa is going to be the new space. And I think there's going to be a number of investors driving that. And it's about ensuring that there are people on the ground in Africa that can put their hand up and actually take hold of that capital and then take that idea and then put it into place. And I think there are the people here. They just need the connection, and that's what we've managed to achieve. And we want to help grow because we believe that this ecosystem, which is going to get born in Cape Town, is going to take over the continent and ultimately help feed the next billion people living on the continent.
Love it. No, this is really inspiring. I think we need more bio-entrepreneurs like you to produce products, essential product and luxurious products. Biologically, they say 60% of physical goods can be manufactured biologically, and food, whether it's milk or meat, you name it, it all can be manufactured biologically in the lab, and eventually it will become more sustainable, more economical and ethical. There's no debate about that. So thank you so much to be on the show today, and it's really inspiring what you're doing, Brett. Talk to you soon.
Thanks so much, Guru.
Bye.